In 8 days, 8 short days, October 10th, I will turn 63 years old. I can't believe it. 63 doesn't seem possible until I remember I've got hair growing where it shouldn't, and brown spots on my face and my back that appeared out of nowhere. Wrinkles and age spots, check. I bruise easier, check. I don't hear quite as well as I used to, check. I walk with a limp, check. I hadn't missed a Sunday in the first 29 3/4 years of my career, and yet I've missed 2 in the last 3 months. And the telltale sign of old age, I fell and broke my hip. 63, so maybe I do believe it. But I wouldn't trade it for a minute. Now, my life, like all of our lives, has been visited by some sorrow and pain. But most of my days have been seasoned with joy and love. 63 years ago, just after 10 on a beautiful Saturday morning, I made my debut appearance. All 5 pounds, 13 ounces, and 18 inches of me. I was born as the elevator was going up. As it was going up, I was coming out. The labor was almost completely without pain. But my mother would remind me that I did begin to cause her pain at about 12 years old. Like every infant, I was completely clueless as to who I was. But since that day, my understanding of who I am has evolved and changed. I thought about all the identities I've taken on over the years, some of them chosen, others not. Before I even knew I was Clayton and Phyllis's son, a boy, before I knew that, at some point, about 5 to 7 months into my journey, I began to have some sense that I was Michael. A bit later, I understood that I was part of a family, the Graham family. I felt lucky to be so. I was a boy. In time, I would be a brother. I went to a Catholic church, baptized 8 days after I was born. I attended a Catholic elementary school, but so too did all my friends. I don't think I understood or realized I was Catholic until sometime later a neighbor moved in who was Baptist. Now, we never tried to make the Baptist family Catholic, but they certainly worked hard to try to make us Baptists. We were Catholic, not Baptist, though. Now, my family never talked much about ethnicity, but in the 5th grade, my friends, you've heard about them before, Ricky and Billy and Denny, they relentlessly teased Johnny Pulowski because he was Polish. Johnny Polak is what they called him. They said his house was dirty and it smelled bad too. Now, I'd been to Johnny's house before he was known as Johnny Polak. I knew it wasn't dirty, it didn't smell, but I kept that all in. I didn't call him names, but my silence sort of made me complicit. And that was the first time I remember being a bit disappointed in myself when I didn't speak up. Somewhere along the way, it became important to me that I was from Michigan, a Michigander, the only state where you can use your hand to tell people where you came from. In 1967, a station wagon filled with black people drove through my neighborhood. It dawned on me that I wasn't like them. I'd never thought of myself as white before, but I realized I wasn't black. I didn't completely understand why most of my neighbors were concerned at the prospects of that family moving into our neighborhood. But I probably would have agreed that they'd be happier living with their own people, as if they were somehow different than my people. A year later, 68, we flew to Los Angeles in the winter. Spent a memorable day in Tijuana. For the first time in my life, I saw real poverty. I didn't realize it then. I didn't realize that I hadn't done anything to deserve middle-class white parents. Just luck of the draw. But today I realize how privileged my life has been. I didn't choose to be privileged, and it shouldn't be held against me. But knowing that does shape how I see myself in the world. That very same summer, we visited New England, and I got a greater sense of our national identity. I realized in a broader sense I was an American and proud to be so. At 9, I realized that I wanted to one day live in New England. I wanted to be a New Englander. That same year, we bought a Buick Opal. I loved that car. We bought it new from the Buick dealer, our first new car. In fact, the first car we owned that wasn't built in the 50s. But some of our neighbors weren't too fond of the fact that we bought a car that was made in Germany. And I distinctly remember thinking, why don't people in Germany have a right to make a living? Of course, I never spoke those words to anyone. That same year, 1968, my Detroit Tigers won the World Series. My grandpa took me to Game 3. I was a huge Tiger fan. I'd have sworn on a stack of Bibles I would never root for the Red Sox. They beat us by one game in 1967. I hated them. I hated the Red Sox like some of you here hate the Yankees. Sorry, Mel Van Dyke. But today I love the Sox. Loyalty is not one of my best characteristics. In high school, I became a Northville Mustang. Mustang pride made me ever so thankful I wasn't a Hawk or a Raider or an Eagle. 4 years later, I completely embraced my identity as a Spartan. Being a Spartan meant I hated the Buckeyes, and even more so hated the Wolverines. Sorry, Bob Suter. And when Magic Johnson led the Spartans to a national championship over Larry Bird and the Indiana State Sycamores, I was high as a kite. I remember marching through the streets of East Lansing with Spartan pride. If you had told me then that Larry Bird would one day be my favorite all-time basketball player, I would have accused you of being on drugs, but he is. Spring break of my junior year at Michigan State, I became Cindy's husband. Now, Cindy sometimes gets annoyed at being referred to as Michael's wife, but I'm more than fine if you want to call me Cindy's husband. A year and a half later, I became a father, still one of my favorite identities. That is, until I turned 48 and became a grandpa. The most exclusive identity I ever embraced over the years was my 7 or 8 year stint as a born-again Christian, where the world was black and white, good guys and bad guys, us and them. Now, that's not everyone's experience in that world, but it certainly was mine. Today, my religious identity is rather fluid. Like my religious identity and my sports identity, Lions fan turned Patriot fan, my political identity has been a bit flexible through the years. Sometimes ideological, other times more pragmatic, at times quick to demonize those outside my tribe, but other times more universal and inclusive. Many of the identities I've had, I didn't choose. I didn't choose to be Clayton and Phyllis's son. I would have, but I didn't have a voice in that. I'm heterosexual, but I don't remember one day deciding, yeah, I think I'm going to be heterosexual. That didn't happen because that's not how it works. Other identities I did have some say in. One of my favorite identities that still fills me with great pride and gives me a reason to get up every morning is being the pastor of the Guilford Community Church. I can't imagine not being that, but one day, sadly, sooner rather than later, I won't be. Someone else will have that great honor. The psalmist asked a wonderful identity question. What is humanity? What are we? The psalmist reminds us that before every other identity we have, Every identity we have is penultimate at best. The only one that matters most of all is that we are creatures. We are mortal. One day I will and you will be no more. Death is a doorway to whatever is next. So we are mortals. And from a theological perspective, all of us are children of the universe. We share a common family tree with every other living thing that ever has existed. Not just humans, but all of life. And from another perspective, we are earthlings. Life is a chemical process that began in the waters. Evolution has worked hard to make us tribal. But the good news is that sometimes our faith pushes us beyond that. And it reminds us that we are all kin, black and white, red and yellow, Christian, Jew, Buddhist, Muslim, atheist, believer, non-believer, gay, straight, trans, all brothers and sisters. And on this World Communion Sunday, I'm especially mindful of our brothers and sisters in Ukraine, in Iran and Afghanistan, but also our kinship right here with our Jewish brothers and sisters who have been subject to some hate actions. And we can show our solidarity with them today. I was hoping to be there at 1 o'clock during the vigil. If you are able to go and take some pictures and send them to me. Religion has done some wonderful things and some horrific things that ought to shame us all. I truly hope our worst days are behind us and we can begin to recognize once and for all and to celebrate that we are kindred with every other living creature. Together we can flourish, or together we can choose to go down a path that is diminishing and destructive. The choice is ours. So let us choose to live lives that help all life to flourish. Amen. On World Communion Sunday, I'm always mindful of the great diversity of the church. I think of those majestic cathedrals in Europe, United States, and the tiny storefront churches like there are even in Lakeport. I think too of the thousands of different languages that are spoken throughout the world. And despite all those differences, we have so much in common. We believe that through the life of an ordinary but extraordinary human being, we witness human potential at its best. We discover that love can overcome hatred and that every life matters. Today, in a plethora of languages, that story is retold. A story that goes something like this, that on the night that Jesus was betrayed, he took a loaf of bread. He blessed it, broke it, and said, "My body will be broken like this bread was." And then he took a cup filled with ordinary wine and said, "This cup symbolizes a new covenant, sealed with my life. When you drink it, do so remembering me." And so now, ministering in his name, let us share the bread of life. And together, let us taste and know the goodness and love of life. Having shared that meal, the disciples departed singing a psalm. Please stand as we close this service, singing hymn number 556, God Who Stretched the Spangled Heavens.